I'm Travis Imhoff, and I'll be discussing the combat basics in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Mega Battle. The player and the enemy aren't actually able to touch until an attack occurs, which makes me believe that they work as triggers. And then once an attack occurs, that trigger activates the attack. So as you can see there, he gets hit. The box collider is a very small window. The actual foot or fist actually has to be touching the player. As you can see, if I slow it down here, it only hurts the enemy I'm standing on when the foot is next to my body. Here we can actually see how close you have to get. They've got that little white flash that doesn't actually count as any damage or anything. I think it's just there for show, really. We'll take a closer look at that. There's also some air combat that seems to have issues with colliding here. When you jump, depending on what position you're in, you will either completely ignore the player, even if you're doing an attack, or the enemy, even if you're doing an attack, or the enemy will hit you from below somehow. If we take a look here, when you jump, it seems the enemy below me is the one that actually hits me. There are drawbacks to having such a small hitbox. As you can see here, I'll slow it down in just a second, but sometimes it seems like you're clearly hitting an individual. Like here, my fist almost goes straight through his head, and it doesn't register any damage. And then these jump attacks, it's like you don't even get close to the player, and it still counts as damage against the enemy. You can also block in this game by holding the block button. The enemy will hit you a couple of times, and then on their power attack, it'll break the block and open you up to take more damage. In order for the block to work, clearly you have to be facing the same direction that the attack is coming from. Here, if I turn the other direction, then the block isn't going to work. I'll also be discussing foul plays combat, which I believe is a little bit tighter. The collisions between the enemy and the player aren't as obvious in this one, because you can still walk through enemies, but they will actively try and avoid being in the same space as the player. They'll also avoid being in the same space as each other, so they don't stack up on each other. Like if I try and lure them all up into this corner up here, you can see that they're all trying to stay in their own area, and they won't overlap like on the same space. No matter how much I try and force them into the corner, they'll always be looking for their own individual space to be standing in. So I don't know if they use a nav mesh on that and just have it avoid obstacles, but it's kind of a cool little feature there. The combat here is a little bit tighter than the Power Rangers, because that little white space that shows up whenever the player attacks, anything that's in that white space is going to get hit, so you don't have to worry about missing enemies there. Instead of a block, they have more of a parry system in this game. When you do successfully parry, when the enemy's they'll say that they're going to attack with that thing above their head, but it will slow down the enemy and the player just enough so that you can start a combo attack. The parry can also be combined with a throw, which when enemies are thrown, then they become colliders themselves and are able to hit other enemies as well. And that's the basics of foul play.